VikesNow, the depressing 6-6 episode. And it's only depressing because there was a 5-game win streak all against NFC opponents. And then now we've returned to the stratosphere at 6-6. And now the Vikings must go 3-2 to reach the postseason. If they go 2-3 or anything worse, we're all going to be scoreboard watching in week 18, which is never fun. We're going to talk about the quarterbacks today. Josh Frey, how are you?
I'm doing good, man. A little bit better now that we're a couple days removed from that loss. Got it out of the way. Hopefully we bounce back after the bye week against the Raiders. But yeah, we got a quarterback controversy on our hands all of a sudden again.
I told you off air before we pressed the button here that every season that the Vikings are either 7-9 or 8-8 or something right around the wild card cutoff, there's always one game or one moment that you can look back to and say, if they just would have ... they would have got in the dance. In 2018, it was Daniel Carlson. If that man would have hit one of his field goals, the Vikings would have been in the playoffs that year. In 2021, it was Greg Joseph's miss against the Cardinals. And it really feels like if they do flounder down the stretch here, we're going to look back at that Bears game, among other moments, but the Bears game in particular, because the Bears were so bad and so willing to surrender a win to the Vikings, and they just couldn't snatch it up. Did you agree that the loss to the Bears was much more devastating emotionally than the Broncos?
I think so, just because the Broncos, you could say there were opportunities to win that game, but still, that's a really good defense. They've been on fire over the past few weeks. You're playing in Denver, which is never an easy place to play. So there were multiple different ways that I could have seen the Vikings losing that game, and ultimately they lose the game by 1 point. And then you see the Broncos this weekend go and just smack the Browns around. You're like, okay, well that's a fine loss. We can get over that one pretty easy. The Broncos should have won that game by a lot more than they did. And then we get to Monday night and just everything falls apart, and Dobbs does his turnover stuff like we've been talking about, and it all came crashing down in one night. And then make it matters worse, the Packers are right on our heels again. You got the Rams right on our heels again, the Saints and the Falcons. Like, there's legitimately 4 teams that could be tied with the Vikings at the end of this upcoming weekend while the Vikings are on their couch on their bye week. So yeah, the cushion is completely gone, and the Vikings have to get back on track now.
And they had a dazzling cushion at 6-4, just had to win one of the games against Denver or Chicago to keep that cushion. They can still reach the postseason. I actually think they will. It's just weird that when we sit down on our couches on December 10th, there's going to be general cluelessness about what to expect. Like, they could come out and win 31-3, and I'd be like, all right, they're back. Or they could come out and look like idiots, and Dobbs going to have multiple turnovers. It's weird territory, because usually with Cousins, you know what you're getting, and it's going to be a pretty decent product. And right now, it's like a crossroads. So what we're going to do, a 5-part episode. It's all quarterback today, baby, because Kevin O'Connell would not commit to Josh Dobbs the night of the loss, or even yesterday. He even made it more juicy. He basically said, whoever can get Justin Jefferson the ball is who we're going to go with. That was the big hint, at least my takeaway. So I want you to break down the case for each quarterback. We have 3 choices, then who you would start, Coach Frey, and then who will start as a prediction. So first, let's get this one out of the way. The case for Josh Dobbs as QB1 against the Raiders. Go.
I mean, you look at the things that Josh Dobbs has done over the few weeks that he's been the starter with the Vikings. I mean, obviously Monday night was just horrific. Some of the worst football that any Vikings quarterback has played over the past few years. But you gotta, I just keep on looking back to that Falcons game, that Saints game, where he was just rolling in the first half and just did everything that we've been asking from a Vikings quarterback ever since basically Kirk Cousins arrived. And you see him rolling out of the pocket, using his mobility. And I really do think that if the Vikings just implement some QB rollouts, a few designed runs for him here and there, just something that works with his element and his mobility and his ability to just be dynamic with the football, I think that there's a chance that the Vikings can still win with Josh Dobbs. And I mean, they've proven that they can. They're 2-2 with him in games that he's played. So they've won some of these games, and they've done it in pretty impressive fashion sometimes. It's just the bad is so bad, and everybody's going to be looking at Monday night going into week 14 and, oh man, is he going to be able to do it? Is he going to keep turning the football over? Are we going to get the great Josh Dobbs that we got in the second half of that Falcons game? You never really know. But I just keep looking back to that mobility and so much that it can offer, especially with Justin Jefferson getting back in the lineup. Defenses are going to have to pay attention to him. And if you give Josh Dobbs an opening, he should be able to take it and get a few yards. And that could be a winner, a winner break kind of play, make or break kind of play for the Vikings offense. So yeah, that's the case for Josh Dobbs, is just all the things that he offers in terms of his dynamic playmaking ability.
I think when it's all said and done, whether he's with the team next year as a patch over quarterback or just a free agent, we might look back and realize that he was a chaos merchant and a guy that comes in as QB2, which happens all the time, that we fall in love with. He thrives when he's not a starter. And then once he's anointed the starter, you're like, oh, I think that's what we might be headed toward. And my theory is after the Vikings lost to the Broncos, Dobbs had some curious turnovers in that game. I'm guessing that Kevin O'Connell for 7.5 days, was in his eardrum saying, don't do the dumb shit. He's like, this defense is so good right now that you protect the ball, use your legs a little bit. We're going to win some games and get in the postseason and get frisky. I'm going to guess O'Connell said that ad nauseum for a week straight. And then you got to Monday Night Football and he didn't listen, or it didn't sink in, because there was so much momentum in the locker room, in the press, from dudes like me and you that said, this Dobbs guy is pretty damn electric. This is awesome. And then it's like that has all been vanquished. And I think for O'Connell, it would have been better for everybody's psyche and confidence if he came out and said, Josh Dobbs is our guy. Everybody's behind him. We're going to bounce back. But he didn't do that. And I go back to that quote from, we had that fumble Lollapalooza in September, that he said, we're going to bench guys who can't protect the ball. And I don't think that was bullshit. I think that applies to Dobbs here. And I think that's why we have an honest to goodness quarterback controversy, because you can try to circumvent a string of 3 and outs or just inaccuracy. But when you're just flinging the ball up when you're about to get sacked, like you're in 6th grade, that's going to kill you probably 90% of the time. And it did against the Bears. So that's your case for Dobbs, the athleticism, what we've seen before. We know it's in his DNA there to be great. Let's face it, against the Falcons, he was great. What is the case for Jaren Hall after the bye week?
Jaren Hall, I mean, the Vikings have used up the most draft capital of any of these quarterbacks on Jaren Hall. I mean, he's the 5th round pick. He's the guy that Kevin O'Connell saw and Kwesi Duffamenta saw in the draft. And they were like, yeah, we're going to go get this guy. And we believe that he can be a playmaker in our offense, even if it's just a backup role. But now, I mean, we're in a spot where we need a starter to step in. And Jaren Hall, I mean, that first quarter against the Falcons, he looked pretty dang good before his concussion. I mean, he was making some throws. He wasn't making those silly mistakes like we see with Josh Dobbs sometimes. And he again, like Dobbs, he has that mobility and that ability to roll out of the pocket, make some plays with his legs. And I mean, if the Vikings really want to see what they have in Hall over the next couple of years and potentially be maybe a QB of the future, I don't know if he's necessarily what you're going to tag as a franchise quarterback or anything. But I mean, if he can just go out there and be a quality starter with the receivers, with the offensive line, with the defense, I mean, it's a pretty great situation for a young quarterback. And if the Vikings want to finally see what they have in their rookie, I mean, I don't see this team necessarily as a Super Bowl contender, especially after that Monday night loss. So even if they make the playoffs, I don't know if they're making a huge run or anything. So, I mean, what do you really have to lose in seeing what you have in Jaren Hall right now?
I'll always enjoy, until we see Hall again, how that second drive is immortalized. Like, look how good, like, and it's fair. He looked pretty poised until the concussion. It's just kind of funny that we're basing all of this, like, let's get a look at Hall because of the drive. I think they tipped their hand on Monday night when he was the emergency quarterback and Mullins was QB2. I think that if you want to predict this thing, which I'll ask you to do in about 5 minutes, I think that I don't think he would be the starting quarterback until they're 6-8 or something like that. Once they are really close to mathematical elimination, I don't think that I think they started him against the Falcons as a total necessity, the only healthy human who was available. And that's another thing about Dobbs that I want fans to warm up to, is he was traded to be a backup quarterback. And because he was so good in his first start, we're like, oh, boom, we got our new starter. But I don't know that the Vikings always envisioned him to be the guy the rest of the way when they traded for him. He could have been depth for Mullins when Mullins got back. He could have been depth for Hall if Hall didn't have the concussion. But I'm with you on Hall. If you already know this season is going to end up in a wild card loss at the 49ers, you might as well go out in style and build for the future in a competitive rebuild season to see if Hall will be a part of the plans. My only conundrum there is I don't know if they drafted Hall thinking this could be the QB of the future, or if he was just kind of like you draft a Chris Boyd like cornerback where you know he's going to be a contributor, not a starter.
Yeah, I mean, I'm on the exact same page. I don't necessarily think the Vikings looked at Jaron Hall and were like, "Oh yeah, we're gonna get this guy and he's gonna replace Kirk Cousins and we're gonna win a Super Bowl with him and do all the stuff." But I do think at some point you have to see what you got with him.
Yeah.
I mean, we've seen him throw like 5 passes this regular season, and I don't necessarily think it's just based on that single drive that he had either. I think the first preseason game he played was pretty bad, but I mean as the preseason went on, we kind of started to see him figure a few things out. He was delivering some accurate passes. He looked a lot more comfortable in the offense as that preseason wore on. And I think that put a lot more confidence in the Vikings and ultimately was the reason why they opted to put him in as a starter at Atlanta instead of going in and finding somebody like a Joe Flacco or somebody and putting them in right at the beginning of the week. They went with their rookie and were like, we know you can run this offense. We know you know the playbook and you can go out and execute a few plays for us. And ultimately it ended up being the Josh Dobbs show. But I do think that was the plan with Jaron Hall after that injury for sure.
Yep, and they could have gone with Sean Mannion, which would have been a safer veteran play. It would have made us vomit, but it could have happened. But they went with Hall, so they did show a little faith there. And at least your case for Hall is in a way to explain why some of the fan base wants it. There are some smart Vikings fans that are like, why not just play Hall? Because this season isn't going to amount to much. Hopefully a wild card, and at least the guy will get some on-the-job experience. All right, the last one before we get to what you would do and what the Vikings will do as a prediction. Give me the case for Nick Mullins, who was, checks notes, the QB2 in September, and it wouldn't have been weird at all for him to take over the job if Kirk Cousins got hurt back then.
Yeah, I mean, for Nick Mullins, I think if we were going to see an injury with Kirk Cousins, I think the Vikings plan ultimately was for him to be the backup. But the problem was that he was also hurt. He was on the IR with that back injury, so he just didn't get a shot to do it. I think the biggest case for Nick Mullins is just the fact that, one, he has the most starting experience of anybody on this roster right now at the quarterback spot. And then he also has the most experience in this Kevin O'Connell offense. The Vikings saw him in the preseason, that game against the Raiders, where he absolutely lit them up. And then they went out a couple weeks later and they traded for him and they saw something in him. And now he's been basically the backup quarterback to Kirk Cousins ever since. And he has the most experience in Kevin O'Connell's offense. He knows the playbook. He knows what they're doing. And at the end of the day, this guy is a gunslinger. He's not afraid to rip the ball downfield. And with Justin Jefferson coming back, if Kevin O'Connell wants the guy that's going to be able to get the ball to Justin Jefferson on time, on target, more often than not, even if it's just a 50-50 ball downfield, which Jefferson probably is going to win more often than he doesn't. I think Nick Mullins he's definitely a guy that I would take seriously as a starter for week 14, just because he has all the experience in this Vikings offense. He's been here for over a year. He knows everything that's going on. And the fact that Kevin O'Connell, one of his comments was that Josh Dobbs, as much as he's done good for the Vikings, he's just not comfortable in this offense yet. And if they don't believe that he's going to be comfortable going into week 14, then I think Mullins is probably, he has a really good shot at starting just because he's been there for so long.
Mullins has -3 rushing yards in his career and is arguably less mobile than Cousins. Does that make you butterfly? Does it make butterflies in your stomach, or is it nothing burger since we saw so much of Kirk in the last 6 seasons?
It doesn't really faze me that much, just because, I mean, again, you look at Monday night and the Vikings tried to turn Josh Dobbs into a pocket quarterback. Like it kind of feels like Kevin O'Connell wants a guy that can be a field general, and rushing ability is a plus, but it's not the thing that it doesn't seem like the thing that he's most focused on. Like Josh Dobbs, when he was running the ball, it was because he didn't know what his receivers were doing half the time, probably. So he just had to get out of there and make a play more than anything. So it doesn't really faze me that much with Mullins. The turnovers are a problem with him for sure. Kind of like Dobbs, he kind of sometimes he just chucks the ball up there and hopes for the best, and sometimes it doesn't go too well. But again, that's kind of, last year we saw that with Cousins a lot too, and it just, with all that receiving talent, it just ended up working out a lot more than it didn't.
So the preferring a pocket passer, or at least having this offense scripted for one, I hope that they adapt. I really think this draft they're going to draft their quarterback, because if not now, then when? I mean, we're going to get to year 3 and 4 of Cousins and or Kwesi and Kevin O'Connell just not drafting their quarterback. It would be really weird to me. Plus, you have Justin Jefferson's money kicking in. I don't think you can keep Cousins around at 40 million, Jefferson at 35 million for too long. Otherwise, the Chiefs would have done it, keeping Tyreek and Mahomes. So I hope that there was a long setup for this. I hope that they don't rule out a mobile quarterback in the draft, because I think a lot of us want to see that to get with the times. And then in the off chance the offensive line regresses, well, at least we have Jaden Daniels who can dance around and not some, stick like JJ McCarthy or something where it's just, a Cousins do over. All right. So we have the cases. You've made them like an attorney for all 3 quarterbacks. What does Coach Frey, who does he start, knowing what you know, sir? And then we'll get to your prediction right after that.
Oh man, I've gone back and forth on this so many
We all
times
have.
between all 3 of these guys. I'm not even 100% sure right now which quarterback I'd really want to go with in week 14. But at the end of the day, I think they have to go out with Dobbs one more time.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think Kevin O'Connell is going to panic just because of this one game and change up the starter for a 4th time this season. So I think at least one more week and give Josh Dobbs a chance against a Raiders team that's, let's be honest, isn't that great. I mean, obviously the Bears aren't good either by any means, but I mean, this is another chance for him to just go out and have a redemption game. Like, just come back and make the play. You got Justin Jefferson in the lineup. Just get these guys the ball and just don't turn the ball over. I think we're going one more week with him as a redemption chance. And then if they lose that game, especially if it's a blowout or it's just horrible offense again, then maybe we revisit it going into week 15, especially with those 3 divisional games coming up. But I think they're rolling with Dobbs one more week.
That's what you would do.
Oh yeah. That's what I would do. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, you go with Dobbs. And I think the kicker there, which I think I discerned, is he probably deserves the benefit of the doubt to have Jefferson for at least a game. The locker room loves Dobbs, and he was electric for the first 2 games. I think if you're pro Dobbs, I think that is the rationale, because, in the heat of battle at 10 p.m. Central Time Monday night, I don't think anybody would have said, yeah, let's do this one more time. But with some time to digest it, I think that would be the sensible theory, is that, well, you're going to get your best player back, and then we can see how good he can be, especially if O'Connell realizes, let's just get this guy moving at all times. All right. So the 2 important quips, I believe, from recent Kevin O'Connell speak for your prediction are, we're going to figure out who can get our best player the ball. And from September, we're going to bench players that turn the ball over. So with 11 days to go, and I'm sure we'll talk about this next Wednesday in case you want to revise it, who will the Vikings start against the Raiders?
I really think it's Nick Mullins. Honestly, yeah. I think they're going to do it. The revenge game for the old Raider. I just think Mullins offers a lot more in terms of his arm ability and his arm strength, just being able to get the ball downfield, than I think Dobbs does. And again, just his comfortability in the offense. O'Connell, like I said, harped on that after the game, where Josh Dobbs just doesn't seem comfortable with that with that playbook yet. So I think in a game where, if the Vikings want to make the playoffs, they kind of have to win in week 14. I think they're going to go with the veteran guy who's been there before. He's played. He hasn't started a game in the Vikings offense yet, but he came in week 18 against the Bears and looked pretty dang good. Obviously that's the Bears defense, but so was Monday night. So I do think that they're ultimately going to go with Mullins. This is kind of, like I said, the do or die time for this team if they really want to make the playoffs. Obviously they got those 3 divisional games, but especially for the wild card, you need to get back above 500 going into that final stretch. So yeah, I think they're going to roll with Mullins.
The thing to remember about Mullins, for folks that might be new to his resume, is he throws picks too. It's just that he doesn't really throw 4 per game. And I think you would just have less risk if you went with Mullins. And man, I need a little bit more time. That's wishy-washy because I made you do it to make a formal prediction.
Yeah, come
on. You can reverse yours too on Wednesday when we learn a little bit more. But I think because they were so non-committal about Dobbs. You had a slam dunk opportunity to say, Dobbs is our guy. I think it's probably leaning toward Mullins, but it's tricky because Dobbs was so damn good in those 2 games. Maybe they'll just figure out their sins and get him on the move more. So you would go with Dobbs one more at least tentatively. You'd go with Dobbs, maybe with a quick hook if he looks like ass in the first quarter.
Yeah, I mean, if it's like 17-0 at the end of the first half or something, then I'd definitely go change it up a little bit. Maybe even then you throw Hall in and give him another shot to lead the offense. But yeah, I think I would go with Dobbs one more time just to see what he's got, see what he can do against this Raiders defense. Give him some time to just reset on this bye week, and then just don't think about what happened on Monday night and go into that game with a fresh start, fresh slate at 6-6, and try to go get a win. But yeah, I think ultimately they're going to switch things up just because of Kevin O'Connell's comments this past week.
All right. Well, we will revisit this 1 week from today with more clarity by then. I don't think we'll have a starter by that date, maybe. But we'll talk to you 1 week. All right, my man.
Sounds good, man. See you then.
Later.